Hi, I'm Stephen Carson coming at you from St. Louis, Missouri in these United States. Please share our stuff and like it. We don't get that much help from the algo, so we rely on the kindness of strangers. Also, we get financial support through Subscribestar for the show and through the public Bitcoin wallet. Donations gratefully received. All right, that's that. Burn the witch. Sorry, wrong stream. That's funny. Okay. All right, coming at us from Toronto, Canada. Black Horse. Hello, sir.
Good afternoon. How are you?
Doing well. It's beautiful. Become very beautiful. I'm enjoying. Let's see. Can I show these off? Enjoying strawberries from my daughter's strawberry patch that she's been faithfully working on, and boy, has she hit a harvest this year.
Wow.
So, really good.
Our spring is so far behind here. We just got plants in the ground. It's brutal.
Yeah. Yeah, you have a short growing season, right?
Well, this year's been particularly horrendous. So.
Oh, the cold kept going. Yeah.
Well, this morning when I left for work, it was only would it be 35 degrees East Fahrenheit. So it's not been a very pleasant spring for Toronto. So.
And we're almost to June.
Yes.
Jeez. Okay. And then, of course, it'll get to like 2 months from now, and you'll be complaining about how it's desert level heat, right?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay. Let's see here. I think I said all the things that need to be said. Oh, I will mention that after this, about 2 hours after right now, the Old Glory Club will be having a stream. We'd been doing them on Fridays, and then we decided to try switching up, do them on Thursdays. So they're going to talk about the DeSantis announcement in about 2 hours on the Old Glory Club channel. I don't know if that's scheduled yet. If it is, I'll see if it is. If it is, then I will go ahead and put the scheduled stream up. If not, I'll just share our. Oh, it is. Oh, good job. It's a professional outfit here. Okay, yeah. So here's
I will say I really appreciated your take on Twitter. We really do need a mute until after election button.
Oh, there's some people. Just please, I'm not entirely uninterested. We just talked about it. I was just on Unpopular Opinions 2 days ago, and we were talking about the DeSantis announcement and everything. It's not entirely uninteresting to me, but it's kind of uninteresting.
Well, the other thing is people have the same thing to say about it over and over and over again.
Yeah. It gets boring. You give us your take, and then let's talk about other things for 18 months or whatever, right? Jeez. Okay, good. Yeah, so I wanted to show the Old Glory Club stream. I'll try to remember to mention that once again. Oh, in fact, I should have kept that up. I'll keep that up. That'll help me remember. Okay, and I'll share that link again in the chat. I just did share that again at the end of the stream, hopefully. And we're ready to go with Econ Minis. This is a great topic today. We tried to pitch it in a way so that you wouldn't recognize it as a topic that's often spoken about, because I think Black Horse has some really fresh information and takes on this that will help you understand how things work, which is one of the main things we do, right? Is just try to understand how the world works. Okay, before we get to our main topic, why corporate America doesn't really care if, I'm sure you've heard this, Black Horse, right? I just was hearing it at my own company. Firing your customer.
Yeah.
You've heard this, right?
Yeah, I've fired customers before.
Yeah. What does this mean? This means that, usually you think of it as like you want as many customers as you can get, right? Well, sometimes you have customers that are more expensive to service than the money you're making from them, right? They're literally costing you too much, literally in dollars and cents, or just too much headache, right?
Yeah, very often it's that their business, their demands don't fit in with your business model, right?
Right. Yeah, they want you to go in a different direction than what your company is about. There's various reasons to fire the customer. But most of us as like regular consumers are not used to that feeling of like feeling fired by a company. And suddenly some of us are starting to feel it, right?
Yeah.
Oh, so that's what it feels like to be fired as a customer. So anyway, we're going to explain why in the world they would be doing that. Why would deplorables and such like be viewed as customers they'd rather not have? And Black Horse is going to come at it from several angles, and it's really great stuff that I have not been hearing in other places. But we're going to hit a couple smaller items. As usual, we like to kind of check back in on certain themes that we've often done a show or a couple shows on a theme, but it's a developing story. We want to kind of check back in on it. So here's one. We touched on this. I would say this connects in with a couple things we've done, Black Horse. One is we talked about a tech bust, and I'm going to get the timing wrong. It was about a year ago, or was it?
Yeah, I think it's almost a year ago now.
Almost a year ago. Okay, yeah.
Pulling up the chart for Meta now. Yeah, even slightly more than a year ago was the actual event.
Okay, yeah, and what we noticed was some real drops in stock prices, and then some companies, basically some tech companies that were riding high during the lockdowns, just pretty much went belly up, or lost almost all their value. Let's put it that way. Other companies that are still with us got hit by it. So that's one story. But there's something else going on here as we look at tech layoffs happening over the last, this is a fairly narrow window. This is about the last half year.
Well, yeah, this is what's
interesting.
What's so interesting about this story. So you would expect tech layoffs in the aftermath of, so the intense sell-off in tech stocks occurred primarily in 2022 and really the first half of 2022. So if you look at like Facebook or some of the other big losers in that event, we're actually now in the period of recovery, both from an earnings point of view and from the point of view of the stock. And so why are we still seeing layoffs during the period of recovery?
Right. And note what the tweet says. In 2023, we have officially surpassed 170,000 tech layoffs so far. So this isn't like there's a few more layoffs in 2023. There's a hell of a lot of layoffs going on in 2023. Yeah. Right? It's non-trivial.
Well, we're only in May, and we're at half of what we saw in 2022. So we could very well have more tech layoffs in 2023 than in 2022.
Right, when 2022 is where it kind of made sense. Coming out of the lockdowns, as we've discussed on the show, coming out of the lockdowns, as we know, during the lockdowns, a lot of sort of virtual activity was kind of in a bubble. A lot of non-virtual activity, like restaurants, were like closing down. Then we come out of the layoffs, people are starting to get out of their house again, and we see a flip of that. And there's an adjustment, expected, really. I mean, no one should have been that shocked. And then we felt like we saw the end of that adjustment. I think I remember us talking about that, Black Horse. It's like, yeah, I think they're done adjusting now, right? To the end of the lockdowns. And now here we are in 2023, and we have basically, what is it, 170, yeah, about as many layoffs in 2023 in the tech sector as we had through all of 2022. And it's only less than halfway through the year. So, whoa, what in the world? So let's tie this in. Let's bring in one more thing we talked about. We had a great show with Charles Haywood of theworthyhouse.com, I think it is. Actually, I don't know what the dot is. .net.com, something like that.
It is .com.
It is .com, theworthyhouse.com. And Charles Haywood had an interesting perspective on Elon Musk coming in and laying off, a bunch of people, and then even more people left. And anyway, when all was said and done, Twitter's got they're rid of about 80% of their staff. And of course, one of the initial reactions to that from a lot of people was, well, Twitter's going to melt down. That they needed those people that are now gone. And now Twitter's not going to function. Well, Elon didn't think that was the case, and I see partisan people kind of complaining about Twitter, but in my view, Twitter works fine. I mean, there's occasional complaints, but it has not been a disastrous collapse, which is what everyone predicted. Well, so we asked Charles Haywood, how can this be? How can you get rid of 80% of your staff and still keep going? And he said, because Twitter, and he alleges almost all companies in America have just they've become jobs programs.
Yeah,
They have people who are not adding to the bottom line. In fact, they're just useless eaters is the unpleasant phrase I heard him use on a stream, which has got a very bad history to it. So he knows what he's doing there. He's being dark. But anyway, it has a lot of people who are a cost to the company, right? The salaries are the biggest cost for almost every company.
Certainly in the tech world.
The company. Yeah, in the tech world for sure. A cost to the company, but they're not bringing benefit. So what that stream actually said, we didn't just talk about Twitter. We said, could this be a harbinger of things to come? That is, other companies or maybe shareholders or boards looking at what happens at Twitter and going,
yeah, in my mind,
getting rid of a lot of costs here.
In my mind, this might be the most important outcome of the Twitter takeover. I mean, it's nice that Elon unbanned some people, but certainly Twitter is not this radical free speech space. There are still people we know who are banned. There are still people we know who are, definitely don't have freedom of reach, so to speak.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, the Twitter acquisition seems to have demonstrated to many in the tech sector that they could fire a lot of their people, and it wouldn't be that bad.
Right.
And it looks, based on this, like some people have decided that it would be good to make more money and not have these people.
Right. So it's a little tricky here, right? What they've done, because in 1 through 6, they do absolute numbers of employees.
Yeah.
And then 7 through the rest, they do percentage.
Yeah. And
that's kind of weird.
Yeah. I mean, Amazon, that's a pretty small percentage. Amazon's got like 600,000 workers.
Oh, wow.
Well, because remember, they've got a whole logistics empire, right?
Right.
So most of Amazon's workers aren't really tech workers. They do
they
other
pack
stuff.
Boxes, they drive trucks, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
But those numbers for Meta, I don't know off the top of my head how many Google and Microsoft have, but 21,000 is a pretty big number for Meta. I would say that that's well over 10%.
Okay, it's saying total number of employees in 2022 was 86,000. So yeah, that's a chunk.
Yeah. So we're certainly seeing the example of Twitter taken up, and it's certainly damaging a class of people who are particularly odious. So
I guess my point, Black Horse, is just to say that these are not insignificant. Again, this is just for the last half year after that post-lockdown initial adjustment that we were looking at earlier in 2022. So even in the past half year, after adjusting for the lockdown, after that initial adjustment for exiting lockdowns, we're seeing some really significant cuts. Amazon's the only one, by looking at a percentage basis, that you could say, it's really not that big from a percentage basis. Not fun for those 27,000 people, understood. But all the rest, these are real numbers. This is not like, letting go of 2% of your staff. I mean, this is really huge cuts in the workforce. And I'm sure, assuming that they're doing them judiciously and they're not cutting into the bone, right? Well, then they're going to see a bottom line benefit because they're getting rid of a lot of costs.
Yeah, I mean, surely getting rid of 80% of Twitter staff has done. I mean, the decline in revenue from Twitter is well documented, but if you trim the cost by I'm sure eliminating 80% of staff, you probably eliminated 60% of costs.
Easily, yeah, right. Because staff cost is such a huge component for tech companies. Okay, so we have a question. Oh, and since I'm using StreamYard, I get to do this. Look at that. Ali asks, do these layoffs mean a recession has started?
I mean, we go back to our show on the non-recession. The recession begins when USG decides the recession begins.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's certainly a recession if you're a tech worker. Let's put it that way.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Thanks for that question. All right. Let's go then to, anything else you wanted to say about the tech layoffs?
No, I will follow this as it
Yeah.
goes on, but
Yeah.
it's really interesting to see here a trend that we thought, I wouldn't say we predicted would happen, but we certainly thought that somebody might notice and might, use that information. And it's quite interesting to see that the executives at various tech companies all saw what we saw.
Yeah, and these are not little guys. I mean, Amazon, Meta, Google, Microsoft, Intel. Intel's in there. Dell. I mean, you can't get much bigger in the tech world in terms of the names here.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is fair to say we've got an industry trend going on.
Yeah, that's what I would say here.
Yep. Okay, moving on to a completely different thing. Okay, Fed talk sometimes goes over my head, Black Horse, so help me here. So, interesting nugget from the Fed minutes. Tighter credit conditions could be putting upward pressure on inflation by constraining supply.
Okay, so there's a whole business around Fed watching.
Yeah.
So for those, who are outsiders to this world, if you're a professional bond trader, if you're in the market making world, if you're in any business where small changes in short-term interest rates really affect your bottom line, there are armies of people who dissect everything the Fed says and does to try to figure out what will happen to interest rates next. And they notice stuff like this. So typically the Fed, in its public-facing statements, will say that inflation is a consequence of lower interest rates or spending, and that disinflation is a consequence of higher interest rates or fiscal restraint. That's always what they'll say. They'll dress it up in different kinds of language, but over the last couple of months, we've seen a very strange argument from the Fed. So several participants on the Fed said that tighter credit conditions by restricting investment were actually generating inflation. So this is officials at the Fed making the case to do the opposite of what the Fed would normally do. So normally when inflation occurs, the Fed raises interest rates to try to reduce the supply of money to reduce inflation. These members of the FOMC are saying that higher interest rates are creating inflation by restricting investment. So it's a supply side argument, whereas the Fed has for a very long time been dominated by demand side arguments.
Mm-hmm.
So why do we highlight this? Well, this is the most important institution in the economy is making a substantial change in their public rhetoric that would result in inverted policy. Is something that we should be aware of. Now, for the audience in the show, we should all kind of mutually be of the understanding that we don't really have the same theory as the Fed as to what causes and doesn't cause inflation.
Right.
So these arguments are all Fed speak arguments. We're noticing a change in Fed speak. We're not noticing something that we believe really affects inflation.
Right.
I mean, interest rates do affect inflation, but it's a very complicated relationship. So,
right. Price inflation, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now to our main topic. So we have seen something that maybe I'm not remembering, but I don't remember when I was younger really, well, things just seemed less politicized in a lot of ways, but I don't really remember anything like a brand being like, yeah, you don't like this and we don't care, to a large part of their consumers. And I guess what's particularly striking is I guess the Gillette case and the Bud Light case, and I'll tell you why. Because in both cases, it wasn't like, hey, there's these fringe weirdos that are upset with us. And, you can't please everybody with a mass market product, right? So we're going to kind of play to our base, and we're going to live with alienating some people on the fringe that aren't really a core part of our market. Well, with the Bud Light and the Gillette case, Gillette is a shaving brand.
Yeah.
For like men shaving, and they went after men.
Yeah.
And then Bud Light pissed off like the deplorables, who are their core target market and have been my whole life. I mean, all my life I've been seeing Bud Light ads, and I know exactly who they were going after, and that's exactly who they pissed off. And well, in Bud Light's case, unlike Gillette or P&G, in Bud Light's case, they don't seem to be shrugging and saying, "Oh, we don't care." They actually seem to be a bit bothered. I mean, I wouldn't say that they're like getting on their knees and begging forgiveness exactly, but they don't seem to be taking it as, in Gillette's case, what he said, there was a quote or something. Basically, yeah, we think we might have lost some money doing this, but it's worth it,
yeah,
something like that, right?
Well, and I mean, there is some history of corporate of like consumer actions of this kind, but usually targeted at media companies. So if you go back in the 80s, there was a famous attempt at boycotting Disney over their position on homosexuality.
Okay.
So there's some history of this, but the Gillette situation and the Bud Light situation and now the Target situation, these are somewhat unprecedented. Certainly in terms of consumer reaction. The efforts to boycott Disney in the 80s totally kind of blew away with the wind. The efforts to boycott Gillette don't appear to have had much staying power, but the consumers of Bud Light have shown a capacity to drink other beers, which is
right.
This is it's something that is new to the corporate world to some extent.
Okay, but all of this leads us back to the question of the stream, which is, how is it, in America especially, where customer is king, right?
Yeah.
How is it that the customers aren't king anymore, or at least some of the customers?
Yeah.
And again, to be clear, we're not talking about necessarily a small number. We're talking in some cases a major market, a major part of the market. Right?
The presupposition of this discussion is that the boycott, the boycott, quote unquote, works, and you convince a large class of people not to buy the product anymore, which is the situation that we have with Bud Light.
At least for the moment.
At least for the moment, who knows? I've made this comment repeatedly on Twitter, and I think on our last show, that the boycott, quote, won't work. But the question is, work in what sense?
Right.
It certainly has worked and might continue to work at reducing sales of Bud Light. But what was the actual goal? What's the actual goal of the boycott? Well, presumably the actual goal of the boycott is to convince corporations that it's a bad idea to advertise this way. It's a bad idea to message this way because it's going to cost you money. Yeah. And the observable behavior from everyone from Disney to Gillette to Anheuser-Busch is maybe we'll lose business, but tough.
Right. Yeah. Right. So the question is, it seems counterintuitive. If I was running a business and, I don't know, 30% of my customers were suddenly really mad at me, I would pay attention and not blow them off.
Yes.
But they're blowing them off. So what in the world is going on? And you're identifying three big areas, three big reasons for why they would be acting in what seems, or let me be blunt, Black Horse. To the outsider, to the normal Joe, normal person like me for that matter, it seems irrational. It's like, what is the reason for it? They just seem to be acting crazy. You know, it doesn't seem to have any rationality to it. I think what you're going to help us see is there is rationality to it.
Yeah.
There may also be some ideology too, but for the people in the C-suite or the boardroom, there are sound reasons for what they're doing. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And number one, and darn it, I was going to get this queued up. I'll have to find it. Number one is
the history of the interpretation of the Civil Rights Act.
Right. It's the law. Sorry, I meant to have this queued up and I just remembered. Here, I found it. Give me just a sec. Okay, I want to share something. If you find this first reason interesting, I really recommend this to you. It's 24 minutes from Paul Gottfried. It's called Why Political Correctness is Political, a speech he gave at the Mises Institute. And he explains why, you know, when he gave the speech, I mean, this was 7 years ago, we weren't talking about woke at the time. We were talking about political correctness, right?
Yeah.
And he was explaining why this is coming from the law, right?
Yeah.
Why it's coming from its sources in the state. And that's really our first thing to look at. So Griggs versus Duke, 1971. What was the significance of this case?
So Griggs versus Duke Power established that any employment practice that can be shown to disparately impact a protected class of employees is a violation of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. So what does that mean? That means that anything you do as a company, that even if it has a neutral intention, so if you establish a rule that you have to conduct yourself in a certain way as an employee, and that rule happens to disparately impact any of the ever-growing list of protected classes, then they have an employment lawsuit against you. And so Griggs versus Duke Power is the first of a long line of these suits that establishes that you have a right to either class action sue or sue as an individual your employer if they've created an environment which has a disparate impact on your protected class.
Now, was this the end of IQ testing for employment?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so this is what did it. I knew something did it, but I had not put my finger on it.
Yeah.
It's actually a little bit later than I expected, 1971.
Yeah, well, there's case law before this, but Griggs versus Duke Power is where modern disparate impact is instantiated in the law.
Yeah, it gets really locked in. Right. So yeah, I'm an employer. I feel that because of the nature of my business, I need smart people. So I just want to make sure that people have an IQ above a certain level, because below that, I know they're not going to be able to handle the complexity of my business. So I do an IQ test, and some protected group doesn't do well on IQ tests, and now I'm in trouble as of 1971.
Yeah,
right.
And so I have to find a new way. Actually, my mother was hired at IBM via an IQ test. That became illegal to do in the United States not long after she was hired.
Okay. Anything else on this 1971 decision?
No, it establishes the precedent, and then we're going to see how in 1978 this precedent is applied to like direct cost. So in 1978, City of Los Angeles versus Manhart, this is one of a very a wide body of case law to look at workplace conditions that are seen to disparately impact a group. In this case, women in the sort of 20 to 50 range tend to have higher healthcare costs than men, mostly related to childbirth. And so historically, health insurance was more expensive for women than men. And the employer, in this case, City of Los Angeles, was passing that increased healthcare cost onto the employee. So they were charging, their payroll deductions for women were higher than their payroll deductions for men because of the difference in cost. And Supreme Court says, no, you can't do that. So this means that even if you've got like an ironclad cost coming in that that bears on the class of employee that you're disparately impacting, you're still in violation of the Civil Rights Law 8th Act. You can't do that. You'll be subject to substantial civil penalties.
Now, this one hits home a bit for me, Black Horse, and tell me if I'm misunderstanding the situation. But whenever we are enrolling for our benefits each year, and I'm looking at the costs of the healthcare packages at my company, I always feel guilty because, okay, now to be fair, there is a difference between if you're with or without children, or maybe it's just if you do individual healthcare versus you
individual
plus your
versus family,
individual versus family, right? And of course, I choose the family option, but still, I suspect that I'm hitting that healthcare insurance more than the people with my 8 children.
Oh, much more, yes.
More than the people with 1 child, and I always feel a little bit like, I'm a little welfare queen. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a little bit, yeah.
and that would actually come out of this, I think. I mean,
that's correct. They can't.
People with a large number of children are actually not the protected class they had in mind. But I think one of the results of this is that they just decided we're safer just having like these flat fees and not looking too closely at people's sex, the number of children they have, other health risks, right?
Yeah, and you can't. Basically, the consequence of this is employers charge everyone the same amount for health insurance, and it doesn't matter who you are. So I'm subsidizing the 70-year-old working. Well, not in my case, but if I was working for a large U.S. company, I'd be subsidizing with my payroll deductions the 70-year-old with a brain tumor. Like that's just the way it goes in under civil rights law.
Right, or the religious not with 8 children. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, next case is much more recent. It's usually cited as a 2020 case, Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia.
Yeah, so Bostock versus Clayton. So we could have done pages and pages worth of this law, but I wanted to cite the most recent one because it coincides neatly with when you started to see a certain group of people much more heavily featured in corporate HR training. And so Bostock versus Clayton County is the decision in which the Supreme Court ruled that LGBT and Q are all protected classes for the purposes of disparate impact. So if you have a corporate policy, whatever that corporate policy might be, whether it's a policy on the use of pronouns, whether it's a policy on how bathrooms are organized, whether it's a policy on what charities you give to, that's seen to disparately impact, or the other piece is hostile work environment for a protected class. LGBTQ and T and Q are all protected classes, then you are in violation and subject to civil penalties.
Yeah, now I highlighted it, but hard to see. It specifically says homosexual or transgender. It mentions a couple different things. And one of them, it says, let's see, presented as a male. After they were hired, employer, they told the employer plan to live and work full-time as a woman, and that person was fired. And so they said, you can't do that.
You can't do that. And not only you can't do that because it's a protected class by this ruling, all of the other protections laid out in disparate impact are on the table for future litigation. So if you come along later and say that the use of the wrong pronouns are creating a hostile work environment for me, then you're going to lean on this decision to argue that your status as a transgender person makes you a protected class for the purposes of civil rights law, and
Right.
ergo your employer should pay you lots of money.
Right. Or if you're hitting up the company health insurance heavily because of extremely expensive transition costs,
Yes.
medical transition costs, right? And the employer tries to pass that on to you in some way, I bet you they're not going to be able to do it.
And so you'll see around this time, corporate America puts in these really, like, starting in the 1970s when the issue of women in the workplace becomes an element in civil rights law. You see these corporate training programs for how to deal with women in the workplace in a way that doesn't get your employer sued. In the 2020s, we should expect to see, assuming that there are no changes, corporate America adopt training programs to make sure that you treat transgendered people in the workplace in ways that don't get your employer sued.
Right. Right. So this concludes pillar number 1.
Yes.
Literally, there's laws, well, I'm sorry, court decisions in place that put companies in financial hazard, financial legal hazard, if they, don't act in a way that we now think of as politically correct or woke.
Yeah. Right? So if you look at all the things that were hurled at Fox News very recently about their corporate HR handbook, their corporate HR handbook very much reflects the current state of civil rights law. Not to defend Fox News.
You're talking about people were saying, oh, look, obviously Fox is selling out because look at their corporate handbook. It's got all this woke stuff in it. And you're saying it's the same as every company in the United States because literally it's just reflecting the legal situation.
That's correct. And so
it's got nothing to do with Fox specifically. Yeah. It's just corporate America because of the legal situation. That's what they've got to do.
Yeah, and obviously I'm not in it to defend Fox, but that's, if you go and look at the HR handbook for every Fortune 500 company, you're going to find exactly the same set of language.
Right. Yep. Because the lawyers check into they look at these cases and they say, this is what we got to do, guys.
Well, and an important point here is that lawyers tend to be conservative in the sort of small c sense about this. Because there's an asymmetry from their point of view. It's much less likely that they're going to get backlash from an overly restrictive, from like an overly intrusive HR policy than it is that they'll get backlash if some court somewhere decides to make new law at the edge of the protected class issue, and hang a big number on the company.
Right. Yeah, I mean, okay, so point is, what seems irrational, here's step 1 of starting to see that there's rationality to it. That is, it's perfectly rational from a bottom line point of view to not want to put out, get hit with multi-million-dollar lawsuits.
Yeah, not only is it,
which is the exact threat of all of these decisions. You will get hit by multi-million-dollar lawsuits if you cross this.
Not only is it rational, like, you'll be eliminated from the pool of Fortune 500 companies fairly quickly if you don't respond to this incentive.
Right. Yeah. So this is the culture downstream from law point that Academic Agent has made. Okay. So pillar number 2. Once again, we're bringing up Elon Musk and Twitter. Why are we looking at that again?
So pillar number 2 is the principal agent problem. So the principal agent problem is a long-known problem in corporate governance, that the interests of the management of a corporation do not necessarily align with the interests of the shareholders of the corporation. So you might recall a certain portion of the Elon Musk Twitter takeover deal. Before Elon Musk bought Twitter outright, Elon Musk took a 9% stake in Twitter and consulted with the board of directors of Twitter, presumably intending to persuade them to make a set of changes that he believed were in the interests of the company.
Mm-hmm.
So he presumably went to the board and said, look, now I'm a principal in the company. I'm a 9% owner. I believe that made him the largest single shareholder. This company should now reflect.
He says he had a seat on the board at that point.
He was offered a seat on the board. I don't think he ended up taking it.
That's right.
But regardless of that issue, presumably his recommendations were something similar to what ultimately happened at Twitter, that the management should be gutted and the company restructured.
Right.
And from this moment until whatever it was, 8 months later, when the Twitter deal finally concluded, Twitter took none of those actions. So you see here a good example of the principal agent problem, where theoretically the largest, the shareholder should be king of the corporation. They should be able to, the management should act in their interests. And you can see here very clearly, like a very straightforward example where the management of the corporation was clearly not interested in.
I was just going to draw an analogy real quick, which is that, a lot of people thought, well, look, we'll just vote for Trump. He'll be president. He'll now be, essentially
our agent.
Our agent, and he will really shake it up and make some changes. And then we found that the so-called deep state, which is to say sort of the managers of the government, right, basically ignored what he said. Just kept doing whatever they were doing. And even in some cases, like in him wanting to pull American troops out of Syria, they literally just would lie to him. Oh yeah, we're working on it, boss. And they just literally just never did it. He issued an order, and they literally just disobeyed. In another time and place, that might have been considered, like, I don't know, treasonous or something. I don't know. You'd be in big trouble. But in our current setting, these people were hailed as heroes for ignoring this madman Trump, who would try to wind down the U.S. empire.
Hero of the Republic.
So anyway, this is what we're talking about, right? In the corporate governance world, you have the shareholders. The board is meant to represent the interests of the shareholders. In some cases, like when they offered him a seat on the board, he would have been a major shareholder himself, directly representing his interests on the board. Didn't matter. The management of the company just went on its way. Now, because corporate governance isn't quite as, well, I don't know. Tell me what you think about this statement. It isn't quite as screwed up as our government. There is another check on management behavior, and that's what we saw Elon do. He said, okay, this isn't working. I need to have more control. He took over more control, and then he got rid of the management that was being resistant.
Yeah, I mean, the corporate governance, there's a lot of different channels to deal with problems, and Elon followed a very well established pattern in activist investing. So for those who are unfamiliar, there's a fairly long history going back to the 80s of people recognizing corporate entities that have in a principal agent problem, taking stakes, restructuring the board, restructuring the management, and reselling those stakes in order to realize an increase in value. So a very famous person in this space is Carl Icahn. He has the largest activist investing fund in the world. And the predicate of their strategy, I mean, not everybody's going to agree that they're right in every case, but the predicate of their strategy is that they identify companies that are where management's interests are misaligned with the interests of the shareholders, and they correct that misalignment typically by replacing management or restructuring the company completely.
Right. Is it fair to call these the hostile takeovers, or is that just a subset?
Yeah, hostile takeovers are heavily represented in that group of people.
Right, right. And worth mentioning, like in the case of Carl Icahn, there's money to be made doing this. I mean, there is a market incentive to do these hostile takeovers. Recognize that, to recognize the situation where the management is not doing the best for their shareholders, come in, replace them, fix the company up, resell it, cha-ching. This is a real business model that has been pursued to great effect by Icahn and others, right? I mean, lots of money.
Icahn's made $20 billion for himself and almost $1 trillion for his shareholders over the years doing this. So there's real money there.
Yeah.
But it's important to realize how difficult a process that is. We saw with the takeover of Twitter. I mean, if you just look at it from a business point of view, forget the politics of it for a moment. It cost Elon $40 billion in capital that he's going to have to carry probably for quite a while before he's able to finish restructuring and sell the company, assuming he chooses to sell it. But if he was an activist investor, he would probably choose to sell it.
Right.
That's a huge commitment of capital. He's dedicated a great deal of his own time to it in order to dislodge the management, find new management, have the insights in the first place for what should be done in order to restructure it from a financial point of view. There's a lot of investment required in order to make that change. So in order for that kind of strategy to be viable, it has to be clear that the interests of the shareholders are being materially misserved by the management.
Yeah.
So this is where we come to the effect of things like the Bud Light boycott. So, having said that, there's a mechanism when there's material value to be realized by reorganizing the management of the company. There's a mechanism to do that. Now let's have a look at materiality as. So the next thing here is, with Bud Light, we have pretty clear evidence that the shareholders are not being well served by the tactic of the marketing tactics that have been applied to Bud Light.
Mm-hmm.
So here's a quote from, I believe it's the Economist, where this article was published. They interviewed a series of executives, both at Bud Light and at competitors, Molson Coors. And they all had a very kind of sympathetic view to Bud Light for getting caught in this boycott. They thought it was very unfair to those poor executives. Life is really tough being a manager of a major beer brand. So it's not just bankers' lives that matter. So this is Bud Light, in order to try to defend itself from this action, convinced other executives to highlight on their web pages their longstanding support of LGBTQ causes to try to protect themselves from being singled out. Fine. It's not working. The strategy is not serving Bud Light. So why is it that this strategy? So if this strategy is not serving Bud Light, why do we expect the strategy to result in the replacement of management and restructuring, or do we expect this strategy to go unpunished? So the next thing is to look at whether there's a material financial incentive to restructure the company. Right. So how important is, so Bud Light is owned by a giant company, and AB InBev. AB is the old Anheuser-Busch, which was bought by InBev, which is
a Dutch company.
A Dutch company, yeah. Anyways, they have a very large international business. So unfortunately, their earnings report doesn't break out revenue by brand and by region, but they do break out revenue by region. So we've got our two regions likely to be affected by the boycott, quote, North America and quote, Middle America, that together make up.
Oh, wait, caution here. Middle Americas. Okay, so I think North America is U.S. and Canada. Middle Americas would be Mexico, Central America, and so forth. Am I wrong?
I don't know. That's why I included them both.
Yeah. Okay.
So I wasn't sure. Both of those are plausible regions affected by the boycott, because the actual consumer information that's being used to say that sales are down 30% is U.S. information. So it's possible that both of those regions might contribute to U.S. Sales. So in the interest of being conservative, we're going to give them credit for both being candidate regions. So together they make up about 40% of InBev's revenue.
Right.
So the next factor is, well, how much of that is going to be Bud Light versus the portfolio of other brands? So we had a look. AB InBev has over 100 beer brands that sell in the North American region. This is a breakdown by market share of beer brands in the North American region. I've highlighted of the top 10 how many of them are owned by AB InBev. You can see Bud Light's their biggest brand, but there's a lot of other brands. If you do the math across all 100 brands, Bud Light is something like 40 to 50% of their revenue, and this is counting of their beer revenue.
Beer revenue
in the North American region, and that's counting a generous interpretation of what Bud Light is. So brands like Bud Light Lime are quite popular. I counted that as part of Bud Light because, again, we're being as generous as possible to the size of revenue that's at stake.
Right.
So first we got 40% in North America, then potentially 50% of that revenue, or of the North American beer revenue, is Bud Light, plausibly. And then the other factor is of AB InBev's revenue in the North American region, 40% of it is non-beer. So 60% of it is beer. So we've got 40% times 60% times 50% as like a high bar estimate for what InBev's revenue in Bud Light is. So that makes the high bar for what InBev's revenue at stake in North American Bud Light at about 12% of their revenue. So 12% of their revenue, you've hit.
Which maybe they've lost 20%. You're saying, let's be conservative. Let's imagine real success here. A sustained 30% hit on 12% of their revenue.
So you're looking
that's
at
about 3 to 4% of InBev's revenue.
Yes.
At stake.
InBev tracks 6
to 12. Not nothing.
But InBev tracks 6 to 12% annual increases in revenue every year. So from a corporate results point of view, that's very easy to hide. Especially because if this goes on long enough, they'll be able to make commensurate cost adjustments because they won't have to brew all that beer.
Right.
So it's not like that's going to hit the bottom line directly. You're going to have some drag on results, but you're not going to have the kind of drag on results that would make InBev the target for the kind of activist investing campaign that would be necessary to dislodge management.
Right. Yeah, you need to have a case where you can turn the company around in double-digit changes in terms of cost reduction or revenue increase, right?
Yeah, I mean,
you've got to have well over heavy double-digit changes to one or both to justify spending all the money to take a company over, transform it, resell it, right?
We looked at the case of Twitter. In the case of Twitter, like 80% of the staff were readily fireable without impairing the company.
Huge cost cut.
Yeah. That's the kind of opportunity that you need in order to justify displacing management through the kind of tactics that are available to you.
Yeah.
So what you have at AB InBev is a bunch of mid-level executives, like regional executives for AB InBev, who are all going to have sleepless nights and wonder if they get fired and have to get another job.
Right.
But what you're not going to have is a target for like fundamental restructuring.
Hostile takeover. Right.
Which brings us back to the other element at play. So assume for a moment that what you have is you have regional executives that might lose their job because of this. What's the incentive structure for the management layer rather than the shareholder?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we know that the management layer for corporations like AB InBev in the United States is going to be your typical kind of Ivy League class,
Right.
who all have many comparable opportunities at competitive companies in the industry, and losing your job as a result of standing for LGBTQ rights, which is the picture you're going to paint if you go elsewhere, is really going to look like a good story if you go and get another job somewhere else.
Right.
So
you're a diversity and inclusion martyr.
Yeah, exactly. So
right.
If you look at the agent's incentives rather than the principal's incentives, the agent might have their personal incentive to act out their ideological convictions. They also have the incentive that if they become a diversity and inclusion martyr, their prospects on the job market are very good. These people often, if you look at the lady who started this campaign, I'm sure she'll get a book deal out of it. She'll do very well. So you can see where, in the absence of enough incentive for the principal, is very, very difficult to convince the agent that they should act differently.
Right. So pillar number one is the legal changes, the change to the legal atmosphere. Pillar number two is the fact that management has a different set of incentives facing it than just sheer, do the right thing to make the most money or whatever. It's way more complicated than that.
And that management is very, very insulated from any efforts to dislodge it.
Right. It is hard to get rid of, and in particular, even if you get rid of them from one place, they just haven't gotten rid of them. They just move around.
These people will all be making beer for Coors Light.
Yeah. Right. Now, here's the one that really shocked me. Number 3 is the nature of the consumers themselves, which, one could naively think, hey, especially with something like Bud Light, hey, it's people like us who don't like this woke stuff the corporations are doing, right?
Yeah.
Think again.
Yeah. Well, so this is a fact which shapes marketing strategy all over America. Disproportionately, middle upper and upper income families are lean progressive, and quite dramatically so. And the higher you go on the income scale, the more you lean progressive. So when companies are taking progressive marketing strategies, they're doing so very often because they're trying to make the higher margins that go with targeting their product at the higher income end of the market. And if you listen, in a non-ideological way to what the marketing chair at Bud Light said before she was put on leave, you can see she was quite intentionally doing this, right? She wanted to get rid of a customer base that doesn't have much capacity to pay, and get a different customer base.
Got it.
And when you say, like, how do you get fired as a client? Well, one of the ways you get fired as a client is because somebody thinks that somebody else is going to pay higher margins for the product.
Right.
So,
right. So let's get out of selling cheap beer to the plebs, and let's move up market.
Yeah.
Right. To people who will pay a bit more. It'll be more profitable for us.
Yeah. Basically, all high-end products have higher margins than low-end products. So you can see this really dramatically with the car industry, where the car industry has forever been ignoring the demands of their customers for low price cars with very few features, and aggressively pursuing the part of the market that wants lots of fancy features because there's more margin in those cars.
Now, I thought I understood this chart, but I'm studying it better. So the bars are that Democrat Republican balance, right?
The bars are actual population. So how many households are in each category?
Oh, I see. Okay. Just sheer numbers of people. That's the thing on the right.
Yes.
Okay. So the thing on the left is okay. I got it. So
Is the
55K and below leans Republican, though just barely at the bottom and the top of that range, I noticed.
Yeah.
Or it's pretty much even at the bottom and the top. But then once you get above 55K median household income, then it goes blue.
Yes.
And there's less of them. It's a little hard to tell from the chart. Maybe less of the greater than 55K by individual. But as you're just saying, with high margin and all that, it's not about just counting noses on customers. It's about how much money are you making.
Yeah.
And you make more money selling to higher income customers who will spend more on your high margin product, right?
Yeah. And so even if you didn't have the legal and sort of principal agent problem incentives pointing your way, you would expect marketing strategy from corporate America to lean farther left than like the sort of political average of the country, because in politics you're counting heads, in marketing you're counting dollars.
Right. So as we saw in 2016, the country can elect Trump and still have corporations that are, well, I remember all the corporations were like denouncing Trump when he got elected or something. It's a little vague, but I remember something like that, don't you?
Yeah, no, I mean, lots of people came out with statements about how horrible this was.
Right. From big companies.
From big companies that had lots of, lots of customers that probably voted for Trump.
Yeah. We're with you, blue people. We're not with these low margin people who elected Trump, right?
Yes. So unless you're Walmart and your business strategy is around pursuing that consumer, most companies are chasing really that meaty section between about 65K average household income, median household income, and 100K median household income.
So I was telling you, this chart was a real black pill, because the other things you can kind of see how you would, ideally change the legal climate through some kind of legislative action or something like that. Principal agent problem is trickier because this managerial class is what it is. But then this one, it's like, well, why would any company, even a company with conservative inclinations, if they're driven by bottom line concerns, they're going to have to pay attention to the brutal fact here that the high margin customers are politically left wing.
Yeah, I mean, even if you took the other two problems away, you would need very substantial action in order to change this incentive structure.
Yeah, I mean, this is civilizational shift. It's not something a company can really handle on its own.
No, this is like this problem of corporate wokeness. You would have to change from the level of government, not from the level of corporations.
Right. Okay. Wow. So that is brutal, I think. I love you, Black Horse, someone said. I will simp for Canadian e-finance bros. Sorry, I got distracted by the declaration of love there.
I'm not sure if there are any other Canadian e-finance bros.
Yeah, right. A small select group to love. Yeah. Okay, just wanted to double check. All right. Any closing thoughts then? I'm going to leave that chart up because, man, wow. That is probably enough to explain why companies are acting what seems like such a crazy, foolish thing. It's not crazy. It's not foolish. It lines up with the legal situation just looking at it from financial perspective, I don't think that's the only perspective, by the way. But just looking at it from a dollars and cents point of view, um, let's say you're a company that tries to really go against the grain here, right? You're going to get hit with lawsuits. You're going to have trouble getting managers to manage your company because their values are going to be the opposite of what you're trying to do. And you're only going to get low margin customers because the high margin customers are going to avoid you. You're going to become a toxic brand to them. So that's not a very attractive adventure in terms of starting a company, right?
Yeah, it's not random how we got where we got.
Right.
Now, the one thing I wanted to say before we kind of move on from this is that the target of consumer actions really does matter. So if you look at the consumer actions that we've seen recently, the Bud Light consumer action, because Bud Light was explicitly targeting a demographic which was explicitly targeting a demographic that so by taking the actions they took, they were firing a very large percentage of their customers, which makes them more vulnerable than most to this kind of thing. On the other hand, they're very well sheltered inside AB InBev from any consequences for that action. But you can see how the target selection really does matter. The one consumer action here that I think really does have some hope, and this is not a political assessment. I don't know whether people can be galvanized to do this or not, but the action targeting Target has a lot fewer barriers. So if you look at Target is what you call in finance a pure play. So it's just in retail, it's just in the United States. It has one segment of customers that dominate, that really dominate its revenue. It's a little bit diversified in that it does like grocery retail and a certain amount of fashion, but really it's extremely vulnerable if you believe that its consumer base can be galvanized against it. It doesn't have a big balance sheet. It's had problems in the past with credit, so it's not going to be able to raise capital.
I see.
I said this via a tweet that Oren McIntyre shared. If people in the sort of right-wing culture war space want to take a scalp, the scalp that they might actually be able to take is Target. Because if you, unlike the situation at AB InBev where, maybe you'll clean out a marketing department somewhere and maybe you'll give the regional executives of AB InBev a little bit of heartburn, crimp their bonus style for a couple of years. You could actually do structural damage to Target's organization because they don't have that international footprint that's gonna balance their business out. They don't have other brands. They don't have like a big balance sheet to absorb it for a period of time. They could be hit. I don't know whether consumers can be galvanized against them or not, but they could certainly be hit.
Just wanting to share that. Or wait, what am I saying? I have a show. I'm live on air. Let's share that tweet right now.
Sure.
Let's see. Here is it. That one. Yeah, there we go. Yeah. So you wrote, Target doesn't have a fortress balance sheet, a diversified portfolio of brands, or a large international business insensitive to the dynamics of a boycott. If your goal is to draw blood via coordinated consumer action, Target is the boycott to focus on. Now, it's funny because it just so happened I had argued against Target from this perspective. You're taking the sort of corporate structure perspective. I was arguing against Target from this point of view, which is that Bud Light and even Bud Light in particular, I think it is more it feels more like an insult to
Yeah.
that class of people, right? Like it's like tweaking them to do this. It's been pictured as this masculine brand. It's all over, race cars, and you know what I mean.
Yeah.
It's
Well, and
embedded in the culture.
the other thing that was
It's the you got the Bud Light up at country bars and all this stuff. So it feels like more of like a tweak, a pain point, and therefore it elicits more of a reaction. I think that's part of the reason they were able to get somewhere with this.
well the
Whereas
other thing that
Target is not particularly tied to like white lower middle class people or something, right?
yeah, I don't really know who shops at Target, so I have
Yeah,
no
yeah,
sense as
right.
to whether they could be boycotted or not.
Mm-hmm.
From what I've read, like it's definitely a kind of middle class moms kind of shopping center. But what do I know? The
Right.
Bud Light thing, the history of using kind of attractive women to sell beer and then substituting in Dylan Mulvaney, there's something just viscerally so offensive, just at like
Mm-hmm.
a lizard brain level.
Exactly. That's kind of what I was bringing up. Yeah.
I can definitely see why they were able to get traction on the boycott there.
Mm-hmm.
I have no opinion as to whether you can like assemble your middle class mom's army and not shop at Target or something. Um, what do I know about that demographic? Um, but
Hey, your number one fan delivers, I think, the killer to the Target boycott. Says white women shop at Target.
oh,
It's over, bro.
oh,
We're
jeez.
not going to get anywhere with that. What is it? Have you heard of AWFL?
Yeah.
What is that?
Affluent white single woman or something.
Affluent white female liberal.
Oh,
There we go.
There you go.
Yeah. So the awfuls, they're called. So yeah, that's going to be rough. But I like how you're setting aside that sort of what do you call it, the cultural component. I like how you're trying to be helpful here, bringing this side of it, which is, I think the point is, like you said, to draw blood, to make corporations, to knock corporations back, such that they start modifying their behavior. They have a new incentive to consider.
That's correct.
We just pointed out 3 incentives that are pushing them towards being, woke or whatever. I guess the idea is start stacking up with some incentives on the other side. It'll take a long time to stack enough that you start to counterbalance, but you got to start somewhere, right? If one of the incentives is you're going to lose a significant part of your customer base, that might count for something, right? I mean, it's something on the in the scales. And you're saying you need to look at companies that are going to actually feel it. If you hit a multi-international conglomerate that they can barely notice that you boycotted some sub brand, that's just not going to be very effective. Right?
Yeah, I mean, so given the strategy of wanting to change the incentives for the existing sort of corporate oligarchy, what you would want to do is target pure plays, and you'd want to find the right pure play to target.
Right.
My actual view is that the way that this ends is quite different. So I think the actual correct strategy is capital formation and formation of an alternate economy. So if you look at the Bud Light situation, you're not going to be able to make Bud Light, you're not going to be able to make Anheuser or AB InBev feel the pain. But what you could have done with this opportunity, if you were correctly placed, is you could have grabbed hold of that piece of market share inside a corporation controlled by people who don't hate you. And Red America spending money with Red Americans, and therefore accumulating capital and breaking some of this. I mean, these people have been systemically impoverished over the last 40 or 50 years, which is why they're the lower third of the income spectrum. If you can start to change that dynamic of by spending money by spending money with your own community instead of spending money with somebody else's community. I think that's the correct place to start, and it's also the correct place to start with regard to forming an elite that might actually represent your interest, because you'll be able to.
Yeah, so bringing up those three pillars. Pillar number 2 are the managerial class, who sort of represent those interests, right? And if you go against them, like let's say you're part of that managerial class, let us imagine, and you don't share the values of the rest of them, you kind of keep your head down because you don't want to be unemployable, right? Yeah. Well, what if there now starts to be a number of companies that you can be employed at that are in sync with your values, right? Well, now that starts to change number 2 a little bit, doesn't it? Now you've got a subset of the managerial class who are the red managers, right, so to speak.
And if you have the red managers inside of that world, they're also able to contribute civically in ways that might stop some of the bleeding in red America. So, like, if you look at the civic institutions that red America has traditionally relied on, like churches, like community associations, they're all starving for leaders with organizational experience, because outside of the trades, there are very few business owners that are part of that subset. And so if you could start building capital and start building structures, to like corporate structures that are staffed by these people and represent their interests, then you could start creating a power block there, which is really like that's how French Canada had all of the success that it had in separatism and preserving their culture. They used language laws in order to exclude non-French Canadians from all their businesses, but the principle is the same. They created their own class with economic power inside inside a subsection of the oligarchy, and that class then vociferously advocated for the interests of those people for the future. I think that's a much more effective strategy than trying to convince the existing managerial class that they should take into account the cultural concerns of red America.
Right. So Michael Malice and Aaron McIntyre both talk about the great sorting.
Yes.
And they both want it to happen. That is, I think it's a little overhyped, but let us imagine that Florida really is like this super red state under Governor Ron DeSantis. And, woke corporations start leaving, and the companies that do stay, though, start becoming part of this counter elite, right? That's something like what we would like to see happen. Are we really seeing it happen yet? Not quite yet, I don't think. But
I mean, if you look at
it seems more possible today than it did 5 or 10 years ago. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, if you look at things like new founding and such, you're looking at something that's very small at this stage. And I wish them all the success in the world. I think that's the correct strategy, but
a long road.
Long road, yes.
Yeah, just dropping that new founding link in the chat because that might be of interest to budding entrepreneurs who want to try to build something new that isn't just going to be another piece of corporate woke America, right? That would be like one of the people who'd be an audience for that, right?
Or
kind of people.
Or skilled people who want to, participate in the project by working for somebody who might not, have completely different values than them.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So and I, even if it's small, I think proof by existence is going to go a long way, right? Oh, okay, they're doing it. They have a company that has these values, and they are surviving the legal attacks and so forth, and they're prospering. Good luck to them. But
the other thing I think is that people overestimate the size of an elite or counter elite that's required in order to make real political change.
That's true.
So, like, if you look at the wave of LGBTQ stuff that's presently overtaking us, and you go back to 1970 and look at the number of people who were pushing that forward, you know,
Yeah, handful.
it was a very, very small number of people who were able to accomplish what has been like an incredibly dramatic social change.
Right. Well, except they had the regime on their side, so
Well,
there's that. But
that tiny element of people were, I mean, they were members of the regime, right?
right, yeah, exactly. Right. Anyway, cool. This is great stuff, and it fits very well. By the way, we mentioned Charles Haywood earlier. In fact, I like dropping links. If you watch our show with him, I really recommend that. But the stuff that Black Horse has just been talking about, what would it look like for things to really change? What would it look like for there to be a real counter elite? That's the kind of stuff that Charles Haywood talks about all the time. So I recommend to you his website. And does he feature his appearances? Yes, he does. And then he's been really frequently showing up on podcasts and YouTube interviews and stuff. And I'm not catching all of them, but the ones I've caught have been great. He had one with Aaron McIntyre recently that was really highly
nice.
recommended.
Really nice.
Good. Yeah, so he's thinking about these things as well. So if you find this topic interesting, I'm thinking particularly of young people who are kind of figuring out where they want to go with their life. Take a look at New Founding. Take a look at Worthy House. Some Charles Haywood interviews might plant some seeds about how you can set a course that is with the grain of some of this counter elite stuff, right? Instead of just having to fall in with corporate America as it is, right? Might be worth it. Okay, cool. Thank you. Excellent, Black Horse. Such great stuff today. Thank you so much. And then let's see. Are we doing more on the entrepreneur? I'm not sure. Last time with Ryan 2 weeks ago, we started picking his brain about what he's been learning about the theory of the entrepreneur. He's studying from one of the great living economists on this topic right now, Per Bieland, at his university. So it's been really great to get this stuff from Ryan. We might be doing a part 2 on that topic next week, but we will see. So anyway, thank you all. And just wanted to mention, for those who like this as an option for whatever reason, I have just started making it a habit. It's real easy in StreamYard. I've just been making it a habit to simulcast to Twitter. So if you go to my Twitter feed, you can also see this show there live. And of course, it continues to be there afterwards as a recording. So that's an alternative way to get the show. Maybe it'll work for some people. We'll see. I need to be checking the numbers.
I saw it on there. I don't know. I have no idea how many people are watching it there.
I don't see, when I look at it, it doesn't look that great. And then later, I checked one of them like a few days later, and hundreds of people had watched it on Twitter. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah, so we are getting some viewership there. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep doing it. We'll see how it goes. I mean, if Elon's really trying to push Twitter as a platform for that kind of thing, it could grow, right?
Yeah,
people might find that they like watching things on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, as long as they don't crash when you have 600,000 viewers.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they can handle our little show, even if they can't handle presidential announcements. Okay, all right. Thanks, everyone, and see you next week. I think with Ryan Turnipseed for something else, and we'll be back with Black Horse hopefully in 2 weeks for more econ minis. Talk to you later. Bye.